Hi, friends. How are you? I hope you all are surviving the heat. I hope you can hear me okay. Please let me know if you can't hear me. I haven't talked to Mary Trump in a while. Hi, Ryan. My Ryan Buxton on my team is joining us. Hi, everyone. Hope you're surviving the heat, as I said. And I'm excited because I haven't talked to Mary Trump in a while. Listen, thank you for talking with us. First of all, it's nice to see you, Mary. I haven't talked to you in a while. How have you been?
Who knows? I mean,
Yeah, I
we
guess that's a dumb question right now, isn't it?
no, it's just it's a much more complicated question than it usually is because like life normally is challenging, and then the context in which we're all living, our shared context, is just bizarre and unrelenting. So it's hard to locate oneself in the midst of what feels like constant chaos.
I agree. And I think that's why it's really important to, when you can, turn this stuff off, go for a
Yeah.
walk, go for a swim, meet with friends, don't talk about politics, try to really appreciate what you have. And because it is very overwhelming. And I think this sense of powerlessness, I think, is pervasive in terms of kind of feeling like this steam engine is going, 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 and that events are kind of overtaking things. So we have a lot to talk about. Obviously, we have what happened to your uncle in Butler, Pennsylvania over the weekend. We still don't know the motives of the shooter. He's a 20-year-old man from Pennsylvania. Obviously, there's also news in that former President Trump has selected a running mate in JD Vance, the senator from Ohio. So let me start with the news on Saturday. Gosh, the news cycle is also so fast. It seems like it was much longer ago than Saturday. But what was
Yeah.
your reaction, Mary, and where were you? I think that's one of those events, like you're going to remember where you were when you heard this had happened.
Yeah, I was home doing some work, and I switched. I didn't have a TV on or anything, so I switched over to Twitter for some reason, and there was a post about it, and it just said, um, I don't remember precisely what it said, but there had been gunshots at this rally, and it just felt surreal, and I didn't actually believe it, because it didn't seem possible, right? And then I turned on the news, and obviously it had happened, although it took a while to get any kind of details, and there was a great deal of uncertainty for a while. But honestly, like at the very beginning, I felt sort of how I felt on January 6th, which, by the way, is a day you and I had an interview scheduled, and but I mean before we knew it was going to happen. So
Right.
I spoke to you as January 6th was continuing to unfold, and it was that same sense of surreal reality. Sorry, I had some dental surgery. I can't speak
That's
very
okay.
well. So it felt surreal. It felt, and honestly, I don't know why it didn't feel serious at the beginning. I'm not sure why.
I don't know. It's weird to me. I know what you mean, this kind of alternate sense of reality. And it was strange. I don't know whether we've become slightly inured to gun violence or we couldn't figure this out.
Yeah,
And the whole way it unfolded, and people behind Donald Trump weren't ducking or hitting. I think everyone seemed to be in a state of suspended animation and confused. And, luckily, your uncle was just grazed in his ear. He is so lucky.
yeah,
And yet he had kind of the wherewithal to, I guess, after putting his shoes on, which I can't figure out the whole shoe thing, to come off stage and to clench his fist and to scream to his supporters, fight, 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 in a very defiant way. And, it's funny when you feel like, gosh, I heard a bullet whizzing by my ear, to have the capacity to do that was really unreal. What did you make of the way he was taken off stage and the way he addressed the crowd at the same time?
Yeah, you touched upon a lot of the elements of this that made it hard to process as something to be desperately worried about, because he clearly seemed fine. We didn't know at the time that anybody else had been shot, and tragically, a man died. You should not give your life to attend a political rally. I mean, so we didn't know that yet. I found the Secret Service behavior odd. Like why wasn't he immediately? Why was he allowed to stand up? I mean, we didn't know, were there more than one shooter? So like all sorts of things just didn't make sense. And then yes, the fist raised in defiance and saying fight, fight, fight. Defiant against whom? Fight whom? And this, Katie, continues to be one of the problems plaguing our politics. Like, we didn't know anything about the shooter, and I have to be honest with you, that person's identity shouldn't matter in terms of how we as a people handle this going forward. It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't be, oh, it's somebody belonging to this group, so now we need to tag everybody who belongs to that group with guilt and blame, right? That's not how we work through these things in a way that's healthy. So I don't know. I on the one hand, it made it pretty clear that he seemed not to be seriously injured, which is good. But on the other hand, it's like it made what followed harder. The calls for unity, the calls for turning down the temperature.
Well,
Right?
I wanted to ask you about that. Do you think that this experience has humbled him or has changed him in any way? I think he was quite emotional at the Republican National Convention last night when he entered the room. There are calls for unity, for a kinder and gentler, I guess, MAGA, if you will. What do you think about that? Do you think that's going to be a permanent change of behavior or attitudes, or is that just lip service in the immediate aftermath?
It's extraordinarily short-lived lip service. Donald already sent out a very incendiary post. I think it was yesterday, but like you, I'm having a very hard time keeping track of anything. Yes, it was yesterday, because in addition to the horrible weekend, we then had Aileen Cannon further, helping to dismantle the federal judiciary. But that's a conversation for another time.
Well, we can actually talk about that for a second.
Sure.
I mean, what was your reaction to the fact that that this case, the classified documents case, was dismissed because appointing a special prosecutor was deemed unconstitutional by this judge?
She's a disgrace. She's been a disgrace since the moment she was appointed to this case. But let's be clear, she was taking her marching orders from the Supreme Court, or I should say from the what I refer to as the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority on the Supreme Court, specifically Clarence Thomas, who gave her permission to make this kind of ruling. And I mean, I guess on the one hand, good, because it will almost certainly be appealed. And hopefully she will be removed from the case. But this case, if it's ever held, won't be until well after the election. And it's a tragedy, because this was, of the three federal cases, the clearest among them. And let's face it, we all saw him commit the crimes. He's admitted to committing the crimes. But their Supreme Court said it slightly more than 2 weeks ago, which also feels like several millennia ago. This one man, is above the law. So
let me ask you about the violence before we move on to JD Vance. I'm just curious about what happened. And obviously, political violence of any kind is unacceptable. But there have been some analyses pieces, one in particular by David Fromm in The Atlantic. And I'll be talking to David, I think, later this week.
Oh, great.
But he seemed to suggest that, I'm paraphrasing, that Donald Trump revels in violence. And he said, he's not renounced attacks against Paul Pelosi, for example, Gretchen Whitmer, Mike Pence. And David Fromm writes, nobody seems to have language to say we abhor, reject, repudiate, and punish all political violence, even as we maintain that Trump remains himself a promoter of such violence, a subverter of American institutions, and the very opposite of everything decent and patriotic in American life. I think there is a school of thought by some who feel, to quote the Bible, you reap what you sow. Do you think that your uncle has some responsibility for creating this rancorous, prone to violence rhetoric and his use of language and his lack of empathy, quite frankly, when other people are the victims of political violence?
Yeah. He didn't invent political violence or violent rhetoric by any stretch, but in the last decade, nobody is more responsible for the climate we're living in right now than he is. So he deserves the vast majority of the blame for that. Also, so too does the Republican Party deserve a lot of blame, because they are in lockstep with him now. There is no Republican base. It is the entire party is the base, if you will. So that having been said, nobody deserves to be shot at. Nobody deserves to be killed or wounded because of the way they approach things or because of opinions they espouse. However, we have a lot of work to do here when one of our two major political parties thinks that this man, whom, as you said, has no empathy, who has encouraged people to commit violence on his behalf, who has engaged for years now in stochastic terrorism, who has no remorse, who has no decency when it comes to people he doesn't like being threatened or injured or almost killed, as was the case with Paul Pelosi, to put him at the head of the party, especially given the fact that he is a convicted felon now. He has been impeached twice. He incited an insurrection against his own government. He put his vice president in a position of almost getting hanged. I mean, the fact that we have been allowed to get to this point is very much because, in large part, of Donald Trump and his willingness to push the envelope to the point where somebody like him is seen as a viable candidate for the presidency of this country.
How do you think, sorry, this is my daughter's cat.
Cats are, I'm totally, oh my God, that's adorable.
Hi, Walter. How do you think, hold on, I got to close this door that he pushed open.
Sure.
I think, Mary, I think so many Americans are just craving some kind of coming together, some kind of unity. I know that there's been talk about that and lowering the temperature. But I think people feel that the country has reached a breaking point. What do you think what can we do to come together? Or is the genie out of the bottle at this point? I often wonder that, how can we talk to each other? Because there's just no room for middle ground or nuance anymore. It's become so binary. What do you think?
I agree that it's almost impossible, if not impossible at this point, for a couple of reasons. One, It seems that a condition being put upon those on the left is that in order to lower the temperature and to unite, we cannot engage in analysis or discussion of Donald's record. Like, that would just talking about his violent.
What do you mean? People on the left are saying that?
No, people on the right are saying that talking about Donald's record, talking about his incitements to violence, talking about his criminality, talking about Project 2025, which is a very dangerous playbook for how any Republican administration plans to govern the future. All of that is not allowed anymore because that would be engaging in violent rhetoric, or that would be inciting violence, which is absurd. So that's not a condition that can be met. The other problem is, and perhaps the biggest problem, is that the one person who could do the most to unite us isn't capable of doing that. Donald Trump thrives in division. Look how he handled COVID. Look how he handled his election loss in 2020. Look how he's handled himself post January 6th. Look what he's said about anybody who dares prosecute him, or on a jury who is voted to convict him. I mean, this guy cannot thrive in unity. He only thrives in division. So I'm not really sure how we get around that. I don't think we're going to get to a place where we can come together until the threats we're facing from Donald and from the right are in the rearview mirror, if that even happens.
I was curious what your reaction was to not only the naming of JD Vance as his vice presidential candidate, but the fact that some Republicans immediately pointed the finger at Joe Biden for instigating this violence against Donald Trump, which seems a bit of a stretch to me. I guess they were mentioning like he should be targeted, or we should put him in the bullseye, instead of talking about his age. But I felt like, this was really an unfair characterization of what had happened. Oh gosh, this cat, sorry.
Okay, I love it.
Okay. Sorry.
Oh, what a chunk. Look at that.
He needs to go on a diet. This is Walter. Say hi, Mary.
Hey, Walter. He's beautiful. My goodness gracious.
Yeah,
what a cat.
Cute. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, no need to apologize.
So what did you
I love it.
think of that? I thought that was really disingenuous and unfair for them to make that claim, and sort of ludicrous.
It's ludicrous. It's what they do, though. I mean, it was a poor choice of words for sure. But, that's how we talk about people who are our opponents. I mean, this is normal speech. It's just the timing of using that phrase is bad right now. But we talk about targeting our opponents. You got to put them on a bullseye. You have to go after him. Our language around competition tends to be violent sometimes.
You're right. And it's amazing how many expressions have to do with guns, but that's another subject for another day.
Right,
but,
exactly.
Having said that, what was your reaction to JD Vance as his running mate?
Not surprised. I was pretty sure it was going to be him. Horrified, because it's a unity ticket now. These are the two probably most misogynistic politicians in America right now. They're probably the two most anti-immigrant politicians in America. There's no daylight between them on any issues that we should care about. They're both extremist. And I don't think either of them is ideological. I don't think they believe in anything, but they've placed their bets on what is going to make them the most viable for reelection. And clearly it's doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down on extremism. JD Vance is a political hack who has bent over backwards to become the most sycophantic of Donald's followers. And we know 4 or 5, whenever it was that Donald first ran, he referred to Donald as Hitler. So it's quite a reversal, and it just shows us JD Vance will do anything, just as Donald will do anything the Heritage Foundation tells him to do in order to get back into power.
I'm looking at some questions from the audience. Hold on, I gotta let this cat out. Hey, while I'm just opening that door, can you talk a little bit about the fact that Donald Jr. and Eric apparently were instrumental in the selection of JD Vance? And I'm going to open the door while you talk. I can listen to you though.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I most resent, well, maybe not most resent, but one of the things I resent about the fact that Donald has been in power is the people he subjects us to. The fact that my cousins have any say in anything that has significant impact on the American people is quite frankly obscene. So I find it disturbing that they have that kind of access, that Donald listens to them about anything. I mean, again, not that Donald has good judgment either, but it just shows us how far we've fallen and how much farther there is to fall if we make the tragic mistake of putting these people in power again.
What do you think is going to happen in November, Mary?
For my sanity's sake, so I can get through the day, so I can get through the next 4 months, because I am very worried. I'm worried about, personally, I'm worried about my family. I'm worried about my friends. I'm worried about the country I love. I have to believe that, as in France, people will see the writing on the wall, come to their senses, and as we did in 2020, snatch democracy from the jaws of, well, what is now fascism, and back then I was referring to as autocracy. That has to happen, because what will follow if Donald does get back into the Oval Office is unimaginable to the vast majority of us, because it's so horrible. Like, people don't want to live their lives imagining these things. I can't imagine what will happen, and just people have to believe me. We don't want that to happen. It's unthinkable.
Mary, what do you say to people who believe that Democrats and liberals in particular are being hyperbolic about the damage that Donald Trump might do if in fact he becomes president again? They seem, I read some column where Project 2025 was being used as a fear tactic. I've read the document. It is scary, and the kind of institutionalizing Trumpism is something that I think everyone needs to at least be informed about. But what would you say to people who believe that this is being trumped up, if you will, and it's not necessarily accurate, and it's not going to be the end of the world if he's elected?
Well, I would say a couple of things. First of all, look at his record. Look what he did when he was actually working within the system. Like Project 2025, which I'll get to in a second, and I'm so glad you mentioned it because it's incredibly important, will totally dismantle the system, just as the Supreme Court recently did. So bound by convention, bound by institutions that still function to some degree, Donald completely bungled, I believe intentionally, because he thought it was the best political calculation to make, the COVID response. In excess of 400,000 Americans died needlessly because of that. Look how he treated immigrants, and children were torn from their families and put in detention camps under his watch. He referred to Nazis as very fine people. He went after the LGBTQ plus community, specifically transgender people. He banned transgender people from serving in the military. He created the big lie, which was the first time in American history, one, that there was not a peaceful transfer of power, and two, the first time to such a degree somebody undermined the faith of Americans in free and fair elections. And then there's January 6th. We look at all the criminal trials that, because of sort of nefarious goings on at the judiciary, are not going forward as planned. But he was indicted 91 times. This is not stuff we're making up. We see how he's talked about jury members and prosecutors and judges who are just doing their jobs and doing their civic duty. We see how he talks about his perceived enemies. What makes you think he's going to be better the second time around without any guardrails in place, which, thanks to the Supreme Court and thanks to Project 2025, will disappear entirely? I mean, it's part of the problem is, of course, it sounds hyperbolic because the right is hyperbolic. The right calls liberals fascist, which makes no sense at all. The right says that we're inciting violence. We're responsible for what happened on Saturday. So when we're telling the truth, it also sounds hyperbolic. So it kind of cancels each other out. People just need to pay attention. I think you're absolutely right. If you think that we're overblowing Project 2025, don't read it, because it's 900 pages long and it's actually really badly written. People are coming out with synopses. People are coming out with brief analyses of what it lays out. Just do yourself a favor and look those up, because it will open your eyes. If you want a government stock full of tens of thousands of sycophants who take loyalty oaths, not to America, not to the Constitution, but to Donald Trump, well, then I guess you can go ahead and vote for him. But I don't think most of us want that.
I think there are a lot of people who are struggling, even though the economic numbers are positive and you can show graphs about that, but they're having a hard time affording gas and groceries and housing. And they also are worried about immigration, just on complete open borders. And I think maybe for those reasons, they feel like your uncle's policies may address those issues more effectively. I'm certain that you don't agree with that, but what would you say to people who are really not happy with the state of the country and their own situations, and really are just anxious to have someone who, I don't want to say represents change, but who they believe will be stronger in those areas?
Well, first of all, I would say that this country has suffered enormous trauma in the last 4 years, especially during COVID. It's trauma that was used cynically by Donald Trump to divide us and isolate us further. It's trauma that's never been addressed. There have been no attempts really made to heal it. I would also suggest that people think about the cards President Biden was dealt when he came into office. This country was on the brink of collapse, both economically, in terms of COVID spiraling out of control. In January of 2021, before the inauguration, more than 5,000 Americans were dying every day. Also, democracy was on the brink. So think about that. Also, I would say that the media continue to fail us in this way. A lot of people say that the economy is their biggest issue when it comes to voting. And they measure the economy largely by two things: gas prices and inflation, neither of which an American president of any party has any control over. So it doesn't seem reasonable to blame somebody or give somebody credit for high or low inflation when it's a global phenomenon. And quite honestly, America is outpacing every other country on the planet when it comes to recovery after COVID, when it comes to lowering inflation, et cetera. I would also say, if immigration is an important issue to you, nobody's advocating for open borders. And Donald Trump's immigration policy was a nightmare. So, I think it just requires doing a little digging and getting accurate information from more than one source.
We also should point out that there was a bipartisan immigration plan in place that had been worked on for 6 months. That was one of the strongest immigration plans in terms of what would happen to people who were crossing the border illegally and all kinds of things, and was was orchestrated by some extremely conservative members of Congress and other more liberal members of Congress, but it was never brought to a vote because those who were supportive or loyal to President Trump, he did not want them to vote on it.
Right. Yes, he did not want that win for President Biden, that successful bipartisan legislation, to be something President Biden could talk about in the election. That's cynical, and also it's dangerous. When Republicans are taking their marching orders from somebody who's not even in office to the detriment of the American people for political reasons, we're in trouble.
Let me ask you real quickly about Joe Biden. You believe he should be the Democratic nominee. There's been a lot of discussion. His debate performance was subpar, to say the least. And a lot of people are concerned about his ability to govern for the next 4 years. Why do you believe that he should not budge, that he should continue to be the Democratic nominee?
I think that his performance since the debate should have answered all of the questions, right? He's 81 years old. He's exactly 4 years older than he was when we voted for him the first time around. It shouldn't come as a surprise.
But in presidential years, that's a lot. You see how the office really ages people.
So is 78 then, right? I mean, we're literally talking about a 3-year difference. And, in terms of you have to prove that you can do the job, well, that doesn't mean answering ad nauseum questions about a debate that happened over 3 weeks ago, which, by the way, in political times, is centuries. It means that he's actually doing the job that he's running to do again. I mean, he's proving that every day. And quite honestly, 2 other entities had a really bad debate as well. Donald Trump, who lied I don't know how many times. He didn't answer one question in a straightforward manner. And some of the lies he told were among the most dangerous out there. He actually said with a straight face that in blue states, doctors and women are ripping babies out of the womb at 8 months or allowing them to be born and then murdering them because the woman just decided she didn't want a kid anymore. That is an egregious, dangerous lie. And the response of one of the moderators after Donald said that vile, vicious thing was, "Thank you." So the media or the moderators didn't cover themselves in glory either. It was a miserably bad debate by everybody for different reasons.
I'd like to defend the moderators. I think, shouldn't President Biden be able to correct the record and say that is absolutely false, that is infanticide, it is a felony, this is just not true? I mean, why couldn't he correct the record and call out Donald Trump? I mean, I think that was the idea, that if that happened, then someone else could correct the record.
I'll tell you why. I mean, first of all, I'm not saying that President Biden shouldn't have done that. Yes, he should have done that. But it's very, very difficult, as we've learned, to do that with somebody who lies as frequently and fluently as Donald Trump does. Secondly, if President Biden had done that, it would have been, well, that's what you think. This is what I think. You need the objective observer saying to the American people, no, this is a lie. If President Biden does that all by himself, it's an opinion. And that's not good enough when the lies are as dangerous as the lies Donald tells.
That's not the first time President Trump has made that claim. I think he did in an earlier CNN debate with Caitlin Collins, and it made me crazy that no one called him out on it. But before we go, I got some audience questions. So I just want to be able to ask you a couple of those quickly. What did you think of Lester Holt's questions to President Biden?
I was not impressed. I think he went over a lot of territory that doesn't need to be gone over anymore. And I would have liked to see more questions about policy, which is really what the American people need to hear about.
Do you know anything about his relationship with Ivanka? Was she at the RNC last night, and have you watched any of the proceedings?
I didn't because, tooth, but I don't know. I think in the last couple of years, it seems pretty clear to me that she's chosen a different path. And all relationships in my family are transactional, and this relationship, her relationship with her father, it does not get her anything that she can't get elsewhere. That seems to be what's going on. I don't know if I wouldn't be, surprised if she showed up, but I also wouldn't be surprised if she didn't.
Where is Melania? Someone is asking.
Honestly, I don't care. Sorry, and I don't know.
That's okay. Mary's alluding to the coat that Melania Trump wore that on the back. When someone experiences a trauma, there's often a delayed response. Do you think this will happen for him in terms, I guess they're referring to the assassination attempt?
I don't know. I mean, you would think so. Like his as you pointed out, Katie, his reaction in real time was bizarre. And that's not a criticism or anything, but it was like, I don't know. It was just an odd way to react in that moment, given what we now know was a very, very serious situation. And also, Donald's not like most people. He's somebody who has very serious psychiatric disorders that have gone untreated for decades. So it's very difficult to know how he would react in what is a unique situation, certainly in his life, and that it's a situation most of us will never, ever be in. I don't know. I mean, I also, unfortunately, I think he's the kind of person who would never seek help. And I believe anybody who survives a situation like that should be getting professional help. Psychologically, and he won't.
We should. So you are a clinical psychologist, and if you're just joining us, I'm talking with Mary Trump, who is former President Trump's niece, and she's also written some books and has an upcoming memoir called "Who Could Ever Love You?" that comes out in September. And you also, by the way, are president of Mary Trump Media. Your shows and interviews can be found on YouTube. Tell us a little bit about your memoir, because I also know that, is it your brother has a memoir coming out as well?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what kind of book it is. I know it's about the family, but I don't know if it's a memoir in the sense of, telling the story of his life in the context of the family. So I'll be as surprised as anybody else.
You don't have a relationship with him?
No, because we're such a wonderful, close family. Yeah, I think sometimes things happen and lines get drawn and lines get crossed and people make choices and that's okay. But it makes it difficult, if not impossible.
Does he support his uncle?
I don't know. I don't know. I only know that in the past he was a Democrat, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I guess we'll find out when his book comes out.
Tell us about your book.
I'm not allowed to talk about it too much, but I'm really excited for it to be in the world. It was not the easiest thing I've ever done in my life. It's basically the book I wanted to write when I wrote my first book, but the first book had a very specific mission, right? I had to. I don't even consider my first book a memoir. I feel it's more like a psychological history of a family. So in this one, I get to talk much more about my dad and, you know, what it was like for me specifically growing up in Jamaica, Queens, in this family. So the other thing is my other two books were published very, very briefly after I finished writing them. So there was no lead time. So it's been really like I'm actually going to have a book tour, which I've never had before because of COVID. So that's cool.
That's exciting. Well,
Yeah.
I know that you, as I mentioned, you are doing lots of interviews. You have shows on YouTube. Who are some of the people you're talking to these days, Mary?
Well, at the moment, I haven't been doing interviews yet. We just started a couple of months ago. So our flagship show is something called the Nerd Avengers. So it's the same group of people 3 times a week. And, you know, we have really great in-depth conversations about everything that's going on. And we have other shows that cover legal topics because so much of our news has been legal news in the last, you know, ever since Donald came on the scene and started breaking the law. And ever since, you know, the Supreme Court has made some really egregious decisions. So we've got programming every day of the week, and we're going to be adding more shows all the time. I will start doing an interview show again. And, you know, it's funny, I was just talking about you because as I mentioned at the beginning, we had a conversation on January 6th. And I think it's the second time we had spoken. And I swear I'm not just saying this is an objective truth of mine to the extent that, you know, my feelings and truths are objective. I have never, ever met anybody who is as brilliant an interviewer as you. I learned so much from you without even knowing it because I wasn't doing podcasts or interviewing people myself yet. But, you know, one of the reasons I remembered that interview on that conversation on January 6th was because of how brilliantly you handled it. So,
gosh,
thank you.
That's very nice of you. I pretty much just ask questions and try to have a conversation and try to honestly think of what other people watching would like to know. And, you know, people are saying, talk about the issues, be fair. And, you know, as a journalist, it's been very challenging to cover this election and the last few elections. Yeah. And, you know, I think people really do want to talk about policies. And I feel, are there any other policy issues that you think we should be talking about in terms of addressing the differences between Donald Trump and Joe Biden? Because I want to be helpful to the people who are watching this.
Yeah, I think the simplest thing to do is to narrow our focus. Because just as when we talk about Donald, right, there's so many things, at least from my perspective, I'm only going to speak from my perspective. There's so many things that he's done wrong. There are so many things he's done to hurt the country. Where do you start, right? It becomes this very, very long list and people tune out. It's the same thing with policies. I feel like every single policy that can have an impact on your life is at stake now because of where we are as a country. So let's just maybe laser focus on a couple. I mean, for me, the biggest, most obvious thing that we need to educate people about is what is at stake for girls and women. If backed by what has been a disastrous Supreme Court term in the last few years for women's rights, reproductive health, bodily autonomy, etc., and a Republican administration led again by two men who have an absolutist view of how women should be treated in this country, which is to say, there will be a nationwide abortion ban. IVF will be illegal. Birth control will become more difficult.
I was going to say that the Republican platform has been softened at the urging of Donald Trump to appear more moderate on issues like abortion. Do you think that's a genuine expression of his point of view, because a lot of people say he's not a true conservative. You know, he is a populist. And do you think that, like Reagan, who campaigned on abortion but didn't enact any policies that restricted it, do you think that your uncle has softened on the issue at all?
No. I think that's politics. He's playing politics with that issue. And again, if you doubt me, do what Katie suggested earlier and familiarize yourself with what Project 2025 has to say about these issues. The Supreme Court has just given a red light for any Republican administration to ban abortion. I mean, we see what's playing out in the states. And I know people probably forget this, but I don't remember if it was 2016 or 2020. Donald said that he believes women who get abortion should be punished. So I don't. He again is pragmatic in the sense that he's not ideological. He's not conservative. He's not. He doesn't have political beliefs in the way most people do. He will go the way. He will do whatever he thinks he needs to keep the support of the base to get elected. And we saw this, like nobody softened his stance when he was in office because the extremists had his ear. And in order for them to continue supporting him, he needed to do what they wanted. That's exactly where we are now. And JD Vance definitely believes that women should be second-class citizens. I just look at what this man has said about what he believes women should be allowed to do and not be allowed. They should stay in marriages in which their husbands are abusive. They should not be able to get divorced. They should not have access to birth control, and on and on. I mean, this is really serious and extreme stuff. So no, there is going to be no softening after they get into office if that were to happen.
Well, Mary, thanks for giving us so much time. It's great to see you again. Good luck surviving the next few months. I think everyone is feeling a bit overwhelmed by everything that's going on. But let's stay in touch, and good luck with your book in September, but hopefully we'll talk before then.
Thank you so much. It was really good to see you again. And thanks everybody for the questions. And yeah, hang in there.
Okay.
Stay
Thanks,
safe.
Mary. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.